Hey everyone, welcome back to Low Content Publishing for Beginners. My name is Rachel Harrison Sund. One of the things that I get asked the most is what to expect from an earnings standpoint during that first year of low content publishing. And obviously, while I can't tell you exactly what to expect, as everyone's different, people have different life responsibilities, different time constraints, what I can do is just offer up my own experience with low content publishing and some of the takeaways that came along with that. So today I thought I would just take a few minutes to share with you my own earnings trajectory over that first year of low content publishing back in 2017 and just kind of offer up what I think is probably a reasonable amount of time to start earning some consistent income. As you'll see, it was a process that took many months of consistent daily effort before it really started to pay off. So let's flip the screen and take a look. So this is a bar graph of my entire first year's royalty earnings broken down into US dollars, British pounds, and euros. I've also included units sold as well as the number of titles sold. So as you can see, the first half of the year was a very, very slow build with a pretty big explosion in the second half of the year. In Q1, I wasn't really putting in a whole lot of consistent effort yet. I was still focused on publishing my fiction and non-fiction books. I had a little bit of a backlog of those that I needed to publish before I could really shift gears. So that's still where most of my time was going. And I probably worked on the low content stuff maybe a couple of hours a week. So in January, even though I made $185 US plus a few pounds and euros, most of that money was actually from a few of my fiction books that I had paperback versions of. So I sold 112 units that month in January, but only 29 of those units were actually from low content publishing. And those 29 units were across 15 titles, all line journals and dot grid journals. February, I didn't publish any new books at all. I was just too swamped, but I still saw sales increase by about 47%. March, I published a few new titles, but nothing too drastic. And then before I knew it, we were already in Q2. So April, after about 4 months of doing this, I had basically topped $1,000 when you included the pounds and the euros. And, most books that I was selling were only selling around 1 to 5 or 6 copies a month. But one of my books had sold 24 units and another book had sold 186 units. So 4 months in, this was where I was really starting to see 1 or 2 books take off, whereas the rest were just doing 1 or 2 sales here and there. In May, my income nearly doubled, and I really, really started to notice the 80-20 principle at play here. Just like in the previous months, most of my titles were still only selling about 1 to 5 copies a month, but there were a couple of titles that were starting to sell anywhere from 20 to 100 copies a month. Now, the first month of Q3, which was July, felt like a bit of a bummer. So the first 6 months had been a steady increase in sales, slowly but surely, whereas July was the first month that I took a hit. So I saw a 20% decrease in US sales, but I did have a dramatic increase in UK sales as well as the European stores. So my net units sold was actually up 10%. Now things really bounced back in an amazing way in August, and this is when I started to get really excited. So at this point, topping $6,000 US, over $8,000 if you include the pounds and the euros, I was making more than I was making as an art director in an advertising agency. So at this point, I had been putting in fairly consistent daily effort for a good solid 8 months. And by this time, I was probably putting in several hours a day. So this is when I really cranked it up a notch and I could really see those results pour in. Now, one thing I have to point out here, though, is the reason I had such a huge increase was due to one single book taking off, and that one book generated half of my royalties. So even without that book, if you take half of the royalties away that I earned in August from that one book, I'm still seeing a significant increase from the previous month, just in combination of all the other books. But the really significant jump was that one book taking off and earning roughly $4,000 all on its own. So September, that was the first month that I cracked $10,000. And again, if you include the pounds and the euros, it was actually more like 16,000 US. And I'm working about 3 to 4 hours a day on low content publishing at this point. This was 6-figure territory now, so I was super, super stoked and really wanting to give it my all. Then came Q4, which, as you can see, was a total roller coaster. So I was still earning pretty decent full-time income here, but after the $10,000 month in September, it felt like a total backslide. But when I dug into what was actually going on, it actually made perfect sense. So the book that had made me so much money over the previous couple of months, which was a daily planner, now that we were getting close to the end of the year, nobody wanted to buy that planner anymore. So the sales on that one really decreased dramatically. And if a book that's earning half of your income suddenly dries up, well, then half of your income dries up. So while it was disappointing to see my sales drop like that, it was really no mystery as to what was going on. So by November, I was about 9 months pregnant and I was doing a lot of napping on the couch, and really I wasn't putting in a whole ton of time at this point. And then December 6th, I had my baby, so working was really going to be out of the question for the next little bit. But even though I hadn't published anything at all since November, I still saw a nice rise of sales with that holiday rush. So by the end of year one, my total earnings were just over $46,000 US, just over 5,000 pounds, and about 6,500 euros, with a grand total of 27,224 units sold. So combined, my royalties in all three currencies were approximately $60,000 US. Definitely a respectable full-time income for a part-time effort. And if I just could have crammed January and February from 2018 into this year, then I would have seen my six figures. So by 12 months, I was at 60,000, and just 2 months later, I had topped over $100,000. And that, of course, was due to the massive Christmas rush that happens every year on Amazon. Not only do you get people shopping for gifts in the months leading up to Christmas, but when everyone's cashing in those Amazon gift cards in January and February, you'll still continue to see those heightened sales. So there you have it. Now, what are some of my takeaways from that first year of publishing low-content books? Well, firstly, it's possible to achieve the success of full-time income working only part-time hours. And this obviously is huge. So this is possible. You just have to put in that consistent effort over time and give yourself that patience. And that kind of leads into my next point, which is this is probably going to be a slow build. This is definitely not a get-rich-quick scheme. This isn't going to happen overnight. There is the odd exception with someone who really doesn't have a lot of other commitments in life, and they can sit down and spend all day creating dozens of books, and that's fine. We're all on our own different path and we all have our own time constraints. So you really do just have to go easy on yourself and just accept the time that you have and make the most of that time that you have, and think about this as, you got to think of it as a long game. It's not going to happen in a very, very quick amount of time. You've got to be prepared to exercise patience, consistency, and determination day in and day out. In fact, keep that quote in mind, that success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out. That particular quote really got me through it sometimes when I felt like things weren't going fast enough. And just ask yourself, would you rather give yourself that time to succeed or quit because it's just not happening fast enough? The other thing is, reaching six figures in 14 months sounds wonderful, but it really doesn't tell the whole story. I was really struggling with fiction and nonfiction publishing for 2 to 3 years before I even came across the low content publishing. So it was a process of several years for me to get to that point. And then another takeaway is expect this to be a little bit of a roller coaster. You saw that bar graph, you saw how it was a nice steady incline for those first 6 months, and then it just turned into this. And that is to be expected. I think the best way to mitigate that is to make sure you've got a nice core group of books that are perennial, they're not seasonal dependent, and that way you can try and keep your sales fairly consistent. There are still going to be some peaks and valleys, but you can avoid the really huge peaks and valleys. And, it's okay to have those nice big peaks and dips if you're counting on it and you know that it's going to happen, but definitely ensure that you've got a nice core group of books that are not seasonal so that you can have a little bit more of a steady income. So if you're interested in taking more of an in-depth look at that bar graph I showed you earlier, that's over on my blog at rachelharrisonson.com, and I'll leave the link to that in the description below. I'll also leave a link to my 2018 income report. And man, if you thought Q4 in 2017 was a roller coaster, wait till you see 2018. That was definitely my best year in terms of earnings, but man, that was just like this the whole way. So I break everything down by month on both of those two income reports and just kind of offer a few comments on what I think contributed to some of those peaks and valleys, talk a little bit about how many books I've published, and you can see how many units were sold, across how many titles, and all of that information. So I think it's just really helpful so that you can get a little bit of perspective on your own progress. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you want more low content publishing tips, check out my blog at rachelharrisonson.com. Obviously, videos on this channel. If you want to subscribe, hit that subscribe button. And as always, if you haven't downloaded my 3 steps to publishing your first low content book in a day guide, you can do that by clicking on the link in the description below. Thanks, guys. Have a great week.